I want you to think about a simple question. What is the most common word you use when you are trying to solve a problem? Is it how? Is it what? Or is it the most powerful and neglected word in the English language, why? Most of us, when faced with a challenge, immediately jump to the how. How do I fix this? How do I get this done? How do I make this problem go away? We are so obsessed with speed and efficiency that we skip the most crucial step, the step that Richard Feynman considered the foundation of all original thinking. Before you ask how, you must first ask why. Why does this problem exist in the first place? Why is this the right question to ask? Why does this assumption hold true? Feynman was a master of the why. He didn't just solve problems, he dismantled them. He took them apart piece by piece until their hidden assumptions were exposed and their true nature was revealed. And that is the first and most important mental model we are going to explore today, the art of asking better questions. Feynman's entire intellectual life was built on the foundation of relentless childlike curiosity. This wasn't just a personality quirk, it was a deliberate, cultivated strategy for thinking. As one analysis of his methods put it, he was primarily concerned with his own understanding of nature, having little regard for previous authorities. He didn't care about what the textbooks said, what the experts believed, or what was considered common knowledge. He cared only about what was true, and to find that truth, he had to ask his own questions in his own way. This is a skill you can learn. It's called the beginner's mind, and it is the most potent antidote to the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is the cognitive bias that makes it almost impossible for experts to imagine what it's like to be a novice. Once you know something, you can't unknow it. You forget what it was like to be confused. Feynman fought against this curse his entire life. He was famous for saying that if he couldn't explain a concept to a freshman, he didn't truly understand it himself. This wasn't just a teaching method, it was a thinking method. By forcing himself to return to the level of a beginner, he could see gaps, inconsistencies, and hidden assumptions that everyone else had long since stopped noticing. So how do you cultivate this beginner's mind? It starts with the questions you ask. Instead of asking, what is the solution to this problem? Ask, why is this a problem? Instead of asking, how do I do this? Ask, why am I doing this in the first place? Is there a better way, a simpler way, a more elegant way? Think about your own life. You probably have a routine, a way of doing things that has become automatic. You wake up, you check your phone, you go to work, you come home, you watch TV, you go to bed, and you never ask why. Why do I check my phone first thing in the morning? Why do I take this route to work? Why do I spend my evenings this way? You are living your life on autopilot, following routines that were set up years ago, perhaps by someone else, perhaps by the society you grew up in, perhaps by a version of yourself that no longer exists. Feynman would have been horrified by this. He would have asked, why are you doing that? Does it bring you joy? Does it serve a purpose? Or are you just doing it because you've always done it? He applied this same relentless questioning to physics. When he encountered a new problem, he wouldn't look up how other people had solved it. Instead, he would read only far enough into an article to see what the problem was, then fold up the journal and derive the results on his own. This forced him to start from first principles to think for himself and to avoid the trap of merely copying someone else's solution. You can do the same thing in your own life. The next time you are faced with a challenge, before you look for a solution, spend some time defining the problem. Write it down. Ask yourself, what is the real issue here? What am I actually trying to achieve? What are the assumptions I am making? What if those assumptions are wrong? By asking these questions, you will often find that the problem you thought you had is not the real problem at all. You will discover that you have been solving the wrong problem, and once you identify the right problem, the solution becomes almost obvious. Now let's move on to the second mental model in Feynman's toolkit, the principle of not fooling yourself. This is perhaps the most important principle in all of science and in all of life. Feynman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. Think about how profound that statement is. You are the easiest person to fool, not your boss, not your enemies, not the media, you. Your own brain is wired to believe what it wants to believe, to see evidence that confirms your existing views, and to ignore evidence that contradicts them. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, and it is one of the most powerful and pervasive cognitive biases in existence. Feynman understood this better than almost anyone. He knew that the human mind is not a neutral logical machine. It is a pattern-matching, storytelling, bias-ridden organ that will happily lie to itself if it means avoiding discomfort. So he built systems to counteract his own brain. He was especially wary of experiments where the decision to stop collecting data was made after seeing the results. That is a classic red flag for confirmation bias. How can you apply this principle in your own life? It starts with humility. You have to be willing to admit that you might be wrong. You have to be comfortable with not knowing. As Feynman once said, we absolutely must leave room for doubt or there is no progress and there is no learning. Doubt is not a weakness. It is the engine of intellectual growth. When you feel certain about something, ask yourself, what evidence would change my mind? If the answer is nothing, then you are not thinking, you are believing. And belief without evidence is a dangerous thing. This applies to everything, from your political opinions to your personal relationships to your professional judgments. Are you holding on to a belief because it is true or because it is comfortable? Are you defending a position because it is correct or because it is yours? The third mental model is the Feynman problem-solving algorithm. This is a wonderfully simple three-step process that was once described by a fellow physicist. It goes like this. Write down the problem. Think very hard. Write down the answer. On the surface, this looks like a joke. But like so many of Feynman's jokes, it contains a profound truth. The first step, write down the problem, is the key. Most people fail to solve problems because they are solving the wrong problem. They rush to step 3 before they have truly defined step 1. By forcing yourself to write down the problem clearly and precisely, you are forced to think about it in a new way. You are forced to strip away the extraneous details, the confusing jargon, the emotional baggage. You are forced to confront the core of the issue. The second step, think very hard, is not about frantic mental activity. It is about patient, focused attention. Feynman would often think about problems while walking in the woods, playing the bongos, or simply lying on the grass looking at the sky. He knew that the unconscious mind is a powerful problem solver and that you have to give it time to work. The thinking very hard part is about creating the space for your unconscious mind to do its job. It's about letting the problem marinate. The third step, write down the answer, is the payoff. But notice that it's not find the answer. It's write down the answer. Feynman believed that the act of writing clarifies the thinking. When you write something down, you are forced to make it coherent. You are forced to fill in the gaps in your reasoning. The answer is not something you discover, it is something you create. The fourth mental model is the concept of the favorite problems. Feynman gave this advice to a colleague. You have to keep a dozen of your favorite problems constantly present in your mind, although by and large they will lay in a dormant state. Every time you hear or read a new trick or a new result, test it against each of your 12 problems to see whether it helps. Every once in a while there will be a hit and people will say, "How did he do it? He must be a genius." This is one of the most powerful and practical strategies for creative thinking ever devised. Most people have problems they are trying to solve, but they don't keep them active in their minds. They think about them for a while, get stuck, and then put them away. Feynman did the opposite. He kept his favorite problems at the front of his mind at all times. He was constantly looking for connections, for insights, for new ways to approach old questions. You can do the same thing. Write down a list of the most important problems you are facing in your life. They could be professional, personal, creative, or intellectual. Then keep that list somewhere you can see it. Review it regularly. As you go about your day, reading articles, having conversations, observing the world, ask yourself, does this new information connect to any of my favorite problems? Does it give me a new angle, a new insight, a new question? When you do this, you are programming your brain to look for solutions. You are turning your mind into a pattern recognition machine that is constantly scanning the environment for relevant information. And over time, you will start to see connections that you would otherwise have missed. You will have those aha moments that make people think you are a genius, but in reality, you've just been doing the work. The fifth mental model is about making decisions under uncertainty. Feynman applied his thinking to a wide range of problems, including the mundane challenges of everyday life. In the 1970s, he famously solved the restaurant dilemma. He and a friend were regulars at a Thai restaurant. The friend wondered whether he should order his favorite dish or try something new. Feynman turned this simple question into a mathematical decision theory problem and found the optimal strategy. A recent study with over 2,500 participants confirmed that Feynman's solution was indeed the optimal strategy. What does this mean for you? Feynman's approach to decision-making was simple and powerful. First, understand the system. Second, accept what is uncertain. Third, act on what is clear. He didn't get paralyzed by uncertainty. He didn't waste time agonizing over things he couldn't know. He focused on what he could know and made a decision based on that. This is a crucial lesson for all of us. In a world of infinite information and endless possibilities, it's easy to get stuck. We fall into what psychologists call analysis paralysis. We want to be absolutely sure before we make a decision, but absolute certainty is never possible. The future is fundamentally uncertain. Feynman understood this and he embraced it. He made decisions based on the best available evidence, knowing that he could always update his beliefs when new evidence arrived. The sixth mental model is intellectual honesty and integrity. Feynman was famous for his refusal to compromise on the truth. When he served on the commission investigating the Challenger space shuttle disaster, he quickly realized that there was a disconnect between NASA's engineers and its managers. The managers were more concerned with public relations than with reality. Feynman's conclusion was stark and powerful. For a successful technology, reality must take precedence over public relations, for nature cannot be fooled. This applies to all of us. We cannot fool nature. We cannot fool reality. We can only fool ourselves. And when we fool ourselves, we make bad decisions. We build systems that don't work. We pursue goals that are not meaningful. We waste our time and energy on things that don't matter. Feynman's commitment to intellectual honesty was not just a professional value, it was a way of life. He refused to pretend to know things he didn't know. He refused to accept answers that didn't make sense. He refused to be swayed by authority, by popularity, or by convenience. He cared only about what was true. How can you cultivate this kind of intellectual honesty? It starts with being honest with yourself. When you don't know something, admit it. When you make a mistake, own it. When you are uncertain, say so. It sounds simple, but it is incredibly difficult. Our egos want us to appear smart, confident, and certain, but the truth is that real wisdom begins with the admission of ignorance. The final mental model I want to share is the practice of play and imagination. Feynman approached physics not as a job, but as a game. He solved puzzles for the sheer joy of it. He broke into safes at Los Alamos, not because he needed the secrets, but because the locks were interesting. He learned to draw not to sell paintings, but to understand the act of seeing. He studied biology not to become a doctor, but because he was curious about how living things worked. This playful curiosity was the fuel for all his other mental models. It was what kept him asking questions when everyone else had given up. It was what allowed him to see connections that others had missed. It was what made him unstoppable. As one colleague noted, when Feynman faces a problem, he's unusually good at going back to being like a child, ignoring what everyone else thinks. He was so unstuck. If something didn't work, he'd look at it another way. You can cultivate this same spirit of play. Give yourself permission to be curious about anything, even things that seem useless. Follow your questions wherever they lead. Treat problems as puzzles to be enjoyed, not punishments to be endured. When you approach your work with a sense of play, you will find that you are more creative, more resilient, and more effective. Now, let me show you how to bring all of these mental models together into a unified practice. Imagine you are faced with a difficult problem in your own life. It could be a professional challenge, a personal decision, or a creative block. What do you do? First, start by asking why. Don't just accept the problem at face value. Dig deeper. What is the real issue? What are the assumptions you are making? What if those assumptions are wrong? Second, write down the problem clearly and precisely. Use the Feynman problem-solving algorithm. Write down the problem. Think very hard. Write down the answer. Be patient. Give your unconscious mind time to work. Third, use the Feynman technique to test your understanding. Explain the problem to an imaginary child. If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. Identify the gaps in your understanding and go back to fill them. Fourth, apply the principle of not fooling yourself. Actively try to prove yourself wrong. Assume your first solution is flawed and try to find the error. Look for confirmation bias. Be ruthless with your own thinking. Fifth, keep your favorite problems at the front of your mind. Write them down, review them regularly. As you go about your day, look for connections. Ask yourself, does this new information help me solve any of my favorite problems? Sixth, make decisions under uncertainty. Understand the system. Accept what is uncertain. Act on what is clear. Don't get paralyzed by the need for absolute certainty. Seventh, practice intellectual honesty. Admit what you don't know. Own your mistakes. Be willing to change your mind when new evidence arrives. And finally, approach the whole process with a sense of play. Enjoy the puzzle, celebrate the struggle, find joy in the act of discovery. Richard Feynman once said, "I was born not knowing and have had only a little time to change that here and there." That is the humblest and most beautiful statement from one of the greatest minds of the 20th century. He started where we all start, not knowing. The only difference was that he never stopped trying to change that, and he enjoyed every moment of it. You do not need to be a genius. You do not need to win a Nobel Prize. You just need to ask better questions. You need to be honest with yourself. You need to embrace uncertainty. You need to keep your favorite problems at the front of your mind, and you need to approach the whole thing with a sense of play, because that is the pleasure of finding things out. And that pleasure is available to every single one of us. Stay curious, keep questioning, and never stop asking why. Until next time, remember, the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life.